shower this morning, seriously.
I just sat where my name tag was waiting.
Okay, wait a minute.
Come on over.
And then Kurt's gonna be all alone.
Oh, we can scooch him over too. Yeah. This room is so giant and formal. Conference calls at 2? Okay. So we need to get going.
What's the rhyme or reason on getting the, yeah, that works.
And look at them, they're independent.
Wi-Fi.
This is cool.
How are we looking for attendance? Do we think we sort of have who's going to be here? I know Kurt will be here, but
I think so.
He was just here just.
we're on a short timeline. So in order to give the staff an opportunity, I know you've done some work. It's been a while since we were together last. So why don't I call the meeting to session? Good afternoon. Thank you again for all of your patience. My only opening remarks are just this. This committee was established really with an objective to try and benefit this entire district and the agency. And I had a conversation with Dr. Burke last Friday. You know, our job is to solve problems and figure out how to better circumstances. And I look no further than, you know, the Senate and De Leon and their bill to kind of repopulate our board and the whole argument over the shave. And then, you know, I look at how we got here and what the solutions are, and it relates to our committee for the following reasons. Why did the petroleum industry not put the best available technology on their apparatus rather than buy credits? I mean, there could be a million reasons. It's going to boil down to a couple of things. Number one is it's extraordinarily expensive, and if they buy command and control equipment, it's stranded. It's there forever. And this agency, irrespective of why, this agency has shown them they should be very nervous about making long-term commitments if they don't have to, because those investments can be stranded. And equipment that costs tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars is not paid for in 5 or 7 years. And we created the ability to trade credits, and they used that. Next time around isn't going to be, it's not going to be available to avoid the consequences of our industry. But I look at the development business and a number of other places where the environmental justice community has been actually very successful negotiating results. Large development typically gives something, and at least in Orange County, you've got 63,000 acres of open space that's over time been negotiated for by environmental groups. There's been a win. There's no trade-off here at the AQMD. It's generally a one-way street. Give us this, we've got nothing to offer. And the point of it is this. I think that the industries could do better than the 14-ton shave, and I actually think they would do better if we just offered them some security that if you went above and beyond what's being asked, we will not punish you later. And that really was the whole point of this entire committee. We'd get more current benefit for the environment, not less, more, if we just gave people the certainty that if you go the extra mile, we're not going to short you later. So with that said, Jill, I know you had done some work, and I'll zip it and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. So a couple quick housekeeping announcements for our vast crowd, and I appreciate everybody that stuck around. Please put your phones on silent or vibrate if you haven't done so. If you're looking for restrooms, they're back behind these doors. Go through the 2 sets of doors. They're on the left. If we have an emergency, we may need to shelter in place, or if you evacuate the building, head out to the main parking lot. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I think we're pressed for time, so we probably won't go through the entire policy. But what we need at the staff level is just to get some direction, if you can put that up, on some items that really have to deal with the scope that we're dealing with. We've actually done a lot of work. We had a working group. There's some information in your packet on the participants. We tried to involve not only the normal stakeholders that we typically deal with business and environmentalists, but also try and get some folks in from some of the financial type of institutions and get some feedback from them as well. So I'm going to skip to some of the things that we've done. We actually brainstormed, we developed a bunch of concepts, we ranked them, and then tried to prioritize them, and then staff developed a draft initial policy. We met with the stakeholders, and we've revised the policy based on their input. There's our working group members. What was really surprising to us was the number one thing that came out with the concepts was permit streamlining. And that's kind of one of the scope issues because we really thought that was a little bit outside of our charter for this particular group. It's a very worthwhile effort. It's something we are dedicating a lot of efforts to streamline and get that backlog outside, but it didn't seem like it quite fit within this box. Flexible rule schedules was number 2, equipment life number 3, but all of these things we've either included in the policy or we want to have a brief discussion with the committee and get your input on whether it belongs within this policy or should be separate efforts. Oops. There's also, I think my fingers stuttered here. Okay, we also had some additional comments, not specifically on the policy itself, but people pointed out to us that it's important that we make sure we comply with all our legal obligations as we're putting this policy together, and that if we reduce the black box in our AQMP, that gives much people more certainty. Okay, so we tried to give the working group at least 10 days before the meeting and 2 weeks after, and it actually surprised us that only Gerdau, their company, was the only one that took the time to send us written comments. Now, I'm not saying we didn't get a lot of input at the working group meeting, and we've talked to a lot of people, but we did not get substantial input on the written policy, so.
They're afraid.
They're afraid?
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Okay.
They're afraid, and I've heard that come up at our board meeting. The best example I can give you is there was a statement made that people fear our regulatory might. It was poo-pooed by the staff, and the first speaker, some of you will recall, first speaker gets up to the mic in a very thick accent and said, "I want you to know, I'm very afraid." People fear our agency, and they've learned that behavior, and they're very reluctant because I get feedback by these people. You know, we don't live in a vacuum. It is not a once in a while. It is a common statement that we are very reluctant to get too open and honest with staff because we're going to get a hatchet job later. So they've learned that however they've learned it. Whether it's real or imagined, it exists.
That's really unfortunate because this is an opportunity for people to come and tell us what they think we could do better in this respect.
No,
Yeah.
that's similar.
Just one little tap to turn it green.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. People do fear this agency. And to be honest, from my experience, it was by design that fear was instilled. And it was used as a negotiation ploy, okay? Now, the agency benefited from that, so I wasn't complaining about it. But what Supervisor Nelson is saying is absolutely true. For the past 24 years now, I listen to it almost every other day. And I can't understand it because they'll call names of people that I don't do. No, you got to be crazy. That's the nicest person you ever met. Oh no, you tell. Now, so I don't want you to think that this is a partisan thing. This is about the truth.
We'll have to see what we can do to fix
Yeah,
that.
and Dr.
That's
Burke,
not
look,
acceptable.
aside from any sort of pre-existing issues that any of us bring to the table, hey, of course the whole effort is to get some response. I mean, I felt as bad hearing that as I assume you did. I mean, I'm not throwing that as an accusation. That's just a reality we're dealing with, all of us, and it's a challenge because, yes, of course, we'd benefit from more feedback.
Okay. So the main thing that we wanted to talk with you today about were these 3 items that were very important to the working group members, but as I mentioned, seemed to be outside the scope. So one was the permit streamlining that I mentioned. Another item was new source review and reform. And then the third was regulatory takings. So on new source review reform, we were requested to consider issuing all credits, whether they be in reclaim or outside of reclaim, instead of discounts or holding back shutdown credits in reclaim, which is something we're working on, to reissue those back at full credit and put those back into the market. There's some legal issues potentially with that. Our new source review programs, you have to look at it as whole. New source review reform is probably something worthwhile to look into and would have some benefits. But at the staff level, thought we should bring it back to the committee and say, is this something that really is appropriate in this particular policy? Or is this a separate effort that we don't want to encumber in this policy at
Jill,
this time?
I have a question. Are you saying that the credits that we would have, that we receive back, we were not ever selling those credits?
We don't sell reclaim credits, and we don't sell emission reduction credits. So in reclaim, we're responsible for monitoring the sales, and we approve the sales. We make sure that somebody has the credits to sell, and we monitor which accounts they go into, but we don't hold reclaim credits to sell.
What happened to the, Dr. Burke, maybe you can, since you've been here for a little while, I said the credits that we were giving out to the various different industry entities, such as Exide and those people
Yeah.
who actually sold them and got money for them.
We're actually in the process of working out some proposed amendments for reclaim that would address what to do with shutdown credits for a facility that was in reclaim or issued those credits for free, and that's going to come back to the board later this year. So that was something you directed us to look at, but currently we don't.
But what Dr.
Take
Parker
those credits
also
back.
asked was the ability to transfer those credits is controlled by the executive director. So if he doesn't sign the transfer,
Correct.
there is no sale of credits.
That's correct.
So how do we get in a situation? Now, I know this is not a for-profit business, but how did we get in a position that we just let other people set a marketplace for credits that we issued for nothing and create a commodity? And we don't profit.
Yeah. I was one of the people that worked on reclaim almost 3 decades ago, and I wished we knew now.
Yeah, it was
what we
24
didn't
years ago,
know
I can
then.
tell you.
Exactly, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And on the emission reduction credits, when a facility over controls or when a facility shuts down, they have a 2-year window of their emissions that we look at, and then we discount that as if they had the best available control technology. So the suggestion was you ought to give them the full face of that value. If we did that, we would have to restructure our whole new source review program and then discount those credits upon use. So it's a very large, complicated system for new source review. So that's why the staff was thinking maybe we can look at it, but it might be a little bit more to tackle than just within this policy.
Right, and maybe some dialogue was just overdue, and perhaps this just gave a venue for people to talk about a lot of other pressing issues that
Absolutely.
maybe be perfect for another discussion, and we can certainly walk and chew gum at the same time. But I worry that at least the concept of capturing capital investment as an incentive to get the best you can get, and the idea of just not punishing that behavior.
Right.
You know, remember, at its inception, unless you happen to make a capital investment the day after we pass a new rule, which is possible but unlikely, every entity that invests significant money and does so to comply with our regulations is at enormous risk. Particularly the older the rule is, the more risk you have. that you will buy brand new and it will be outdated quickly. And it's really that one issue that I think if this agency could, and in the case of the petroleum refiners, that might be the most extreme case, if you could encourage those entities to go as far as they can possibly go, not buy credits, buy the command and control. But if you do, how does this agency ensure them that that behavior won't be punished? Because once they commit, I doubt that stuff has much secondary market, if any. Once
Yeah,
you
probably
once you
20%.
bolt it to your property, it's there for good. And if we come up with another strategy in 7 years, that 20-year payback on the, to make up a number, $200 million of capital investment, they're stuck and they're inflexible. Credits were at least flexible. I don't like that they bought credits. I just understand it. We want them to buy command and control. But what's missing? It's certainty. They're making long-term investment on short-term promises. And Kurt, we've had a lively discussion. I know this isn't easy, and this isn't where the compass of this agency has ever been, and it may need some help in D.C. I don't speak on behalf of anyone else, but I've just been fortunate or misfortunate enough to lead this group. But we just need some guidance. How do we just start the ball rolling? And what can we just flat out not do? And how would we change those limitations? We need people that are left here to be encouraged to spend the big money, get the biggest bang for the people that live here now. And in many cases, they share with me, I'd spend the money, but I know better. I'll do as little as I have to now, because if I spend the big money today, I'm going to get stiffed.
Well, I
And
know I'm sorry, go ahead.
It may very well be that a lot of what we're saying isn't explicitly in a policy. Some of this is cultural with the agency and staff. And I don't know where that line is. I'll leave that up to you all to decide that line. But I know I've talked to businesses in the basin that, and I'm going to use an example because I don't know the actual type of equipment, but say they had 4 things that pollute, and they have the capital now and the technology to replace one of those, and they want to do it, but we've told them, no, until you can do all 4, you can't do one. Well, that's silly making on our part. So we've got to have better approaches to be more creative in getting every pollution reduction we can. And that might mean changing policies. Other than this, it might just be a different approach from staff.
Okay.
That's what we hope you're hearing.
Absolutely. And I know we're focusing now on some of the scope things because that's what we need to move this policy forward. But if we have time, I'll highlight a couple of the things in the draft policy where we're trying to address the points that you were raising.
I don't want to drag us further out of line, and I know we're trying to make this a fast meeting, but Supervisor Nelson, in our conversation the other day, I just think he had an outrageously great idea. You see, if we could, and Kurt is over there explaining to Wayne why he can't do this, okay? So, because Kurt's explained to me why I can't do it. So what I'm looking for Kurt to do is go hire somebody who can explain to us how we can do that. Because I would think that we could probably reduce our $1 billion a year number if we could give people like the oil industry the incentive by them spending some money, us reducing our necessity to spend money, if they were guaranteed a life term of the, and I know we're going to argue about whether it's 10 years or 2 years or 20 years or 50 years. That's a detail that you can work out. But we need to figure out how to go to people and say, look, if you put in state-of-the-art stuff, I'll give you 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And I'm not coming back to see you until then. Now, you can expect me on 7 years and 1 day, but for 7 years, you're not going to see me. We got to figure that out. And it's not really an option.
Right, where would this agency be if during that entire painful debate about the shave, the industry was allowed to step up and say, you're arguing about a take of 12 or 14, we're at 16. Argue all you want, we're at 16. Now, we need a promise in return. We need something to get beyond where you're even asking us to go. And right now, we don't offer that. And that's a shame. Because what's our real purpose? To prove how mighty we are, or to give a creative solution to getting more reduction? Now, I don't speak for WISP, but they may be cringing to hear me say they can get to 16. But what reason would they have to get there unless we incentivize that behavior? And an incentive in numerous aspects of our lives, incentives can be great things. If my bulldozer at the county right now works just fine, and I can either retrofit it and just keep it going for a couple more years, or I can buy a new one, the first thing Sean Nelson, the county supervisor, is going to ask his staff is, where are we at in compliance with AQMD? Because I don't want you buying a new piece of equipment if you check and see that rule's up in 2 years, because that equipment's going to last 10 to 12 years. So if we're in compliance now and the rule's about to be changed, just limp the old one along. That's not helping us. We're encouraging people to do less, not more. What's our purpose for existence if we can't crack this riddle? That's really the whole thing. I think there was a misunderstanding from staff that this was an end run, that how can we get people to get away with something? No. There are industries that will do more than we're even asking them to. But we have this timing thing with our rules that put people at a real disadvantage. Because if you go to buy equipment and it's not the first day of the rule, you're already at a disadvantage. Now it's just how much of a disadvantage. And if you're near, imagine if you had to buy equipment today and the rule's up in a year. What do you do?
Because we're going to change the standard.
So
What did we do on the dry cleaner? Changed the dry cleaner rule and we made all those loans and dry cleaners. Did we give a specific time period?
Yeah, for the dry cleaners, we basically
Thanks.
set the standard so that they could have the typical equipment life, and at the end of the equipment life, they were no longer allowed to use PERC. And then we set up the incentive funds so that they got more money if they went to wet cleaning because it was a zero technology, and then they got less money to go to a hydrocarbon because there was a VOC trade-off. And then if they got even more money if they would go to CO2, but very few
Right.
takers took that. But
So we did give
We
them
did.
a deal over
we
the
did,
life term.
yes. We did
So
the
it's not
equipment
unheard
lifetime.
of, Supervisor.
Yeah, we have done that for several things. And we've grandfathered equipment and things like that too, but,
could we ask just the
Yes.
big question?
sure.
Use your best skill set. Kurtz, Dr. Fines, Wayne's, help us crack this riddle. How do we come up with a policy that meets the law, that we're allowed to offer, that will get some benefit for the people we're offering it to and for all the people that live here? You've heard some of these statements. Help us craft policy that will accomplish this. I mean, that's really, we could sit here for 2 hours and still go through that, but that's really the essence. We want to encourage people to do more, and their fear that they'll spend money and get punished for it is preventing that right now.
Right.
How at least in as many cases as possible do we offer some safe harbor that if you stick your neck out, we'll be your partner. We'll go hand in hand with you. We will encourage you. And part two is, if we can do some, but we're limited because the EPA won't cooperate, at least we should go explain what we're trying to do. Maybe they'd understand. I've been to DC a few times. Doesn't mean they'll like me, but they might.
Okay.
But
And
you guys are talking to each other, but I'm not hearing anything come back
we're
across.
talking about what we're going to say. So I'm going to start, I was going to jump to one of the policies where we're talking about useful life, and maybe we haven't gone far enough. But what we tried to do was,
I didn't even know this was from this meeting.
yeah, so we tried to incorporate the concept you're talking about, that we need to write a rule that will recognize that equipment has a useful life, And so we want to work with the stakeholders to do a better job estimating what that useful life is, because we heard a lot of comments that we have an estimate and it may not be what the actual equipment life is. So do a better job working with them to come up with that useful life and use that in the economic assessment.
And please know that our useful life calculations, it's been brought to my attention, that when it's to our advantage, we use a different useful life than when we're applying it the other direction in many cases. So useful life should have a universal meaning at this agency. You should never be able to tell someone their stuff's got a useful life longer when it works against them, and that very same equipment has a different useful life when we're applying something that benefits us. I mean, a D9 dozer is 10 to 12 years, period. That's
Right.
it. I mean, doesn't matter who's using it and why.
And then there's a series of actions there, but also I think the one that's most relevant to this is that people want us to make sure that in the economic analysis, we do make sure to look to see if there's any potential for stranded assets. So was there a rule that recently affected the same category of equipment? And if so, is someone going to have to replace that equipment sooner? So not just what's going to happen with this rule going forward, but what is the existing state of the equipment or that industry? And then did you want to add your suggestion too, Wayne?
Well, my thoughts were, as I'm listening to you speak, is what's an example? Where's a clear area that we can address it? Can we approach this on a perhaps pilot perspective? Let's pick out a sector where there's a good possibility that we can work things out and see how we can apply this across a broader scale.
Well,
Let's try
if
with
you
the
want to hit it
others.
out of the park, go to the refiners
Right.
who have the biggest reach beyond not only our limit that we set, not only the Sierra Club's ask, but set a new limit. I mean, prove to everybody up and down the state of California you can do something bold.
Refiners are going to want a new limit.
We could certainly talk with the refiners and maybe approach it on a source-specific aspect, or we could try to do one specific example. And so to the extent that they want to talk and work with us, we're certainly open to that.
I don't know if they're here, but
We know enough of them. We can reach them.
They might be having a heart attack now, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let me jump back to a couple of the other things. So we're looking for some direction from you on whether we're including new source review, permit streamlining. The other item was regulatory taking. So Kurt, do you want to speak briefly to that point? And could we have the slides back up, please, Paul? Thank you.
Sure. The committee had asked me to address whether an EQMD regulation caused a regulatory takings if it requires an equipment operator to discontinue use of equipment prior to the end of that equipment's useful life. I sent you a memo several months ago explaining why, under the law, a regulatory taking wouldn't occur in violation of the Constitution. Gerdau provided you with a memo responding to my memo and saying that they really did think a regulatory taking would occur, and they offered recommendations that they suggested were necessary in order to ensure that regulatory takings wouldn't happen. And then last week I sent you a memo explaining why I thought Gerdau's memo was mistaken. I want to emphasize two things. I want to first emphasize what my position is not, and then second, what the stakes are here. I'm not saying that you can't, as a matter of law, adopt Gerdau's recommendations or something that has the same effect as those recommendations. You certainly have that ability. There's no legal prohibition against doing that. The point is, you're not required to do so, as Gerdau suggests. You're not required to do so because you, in fact, have considerable discretion in deciding how to shape an air pollution regulatory program. There are lots of different ways to put a program together, and you get to decide. If Gerdau is right, though, in this particular area, you don't have any discretion. You've got to adopt their recommendations or something like those recommendations, or you're violating people's constitutional rights. I think you've got a lot more discretion about that, and I think Gerdau's just wrong on the law.
All right. So a couple of other key stakeholder comments. We had some folks saying that rather than a policy, they would like a specific rule that went to the board. At the staff level, we think we can do this through a policy, but that's obviously up to your direction. We talked about these other things. These were some of the specific comments from Gerdau. I believe we have highlighted all of these. I think the second bullet we haven't hit. They wanted the policy to be a little bit more explicit about that the policy is something that staff will follow. If we bring this to, or when we bring this to the board, we would intend to bring a resolution that would direct us to follow it. So I think we'll get the intention of their statement. We also will add to the resolution that the staff reports will be a little bit explicit about how they followed this policy. And then they had additional suggestions which we have incorporated into the policy. I'm going very fast. Stop me if you have any questions, but I'm trying to be respectful. So we talked a little bit about policy 1, useful life. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these things. There's actually about 7 elements of the policy that we tried to incorporate. Policy 2 is we're being asked to do a better job to look at existing and planned regulations from other agencies that affect the same equipment and the same industries and try and align some of the schedules and the reporting to the extent possible. This, Barbara was pointing out to me, is actually getting to Supervisor Nelson's point as well. When you look at the schedules, when you're developing a rule, we're going to look to see when we approach a new emission limit, maybe looking at can we do it when the equipment gets replaced or relocated or at the end of the life, and then also to provide incentives for facility modernization. So this gets to the concept of, let the equipment run its course. And so to the extent we can do that for our attainment needs, that's something we'll look at. Also looking at the equipment age and flexibility if there's multiple pieces of equipment. Also with that, on action 6, we were looking to see if we have also looked at the same equipment in the last 5 years. That's something that we'll take a real serious look at so that we're not coming back multiple times for the same equipment, the same industry. We'll take that into consideration.
But Jill, I thought we had just agreed that you guys are going to reach out to WISPA to see if we could do a test case.
Sure.
All this, but could we kind of move forward to the permit streamlining thing?
Sure, we can talk about
Because
that.
I'm going to have to leave, and I'm sure Dr. Parker's running out of time too.
Okay.
Right, my conference call just called and I bought myself 5 minutes, 2 minutes ago,
Okay.
so.
Okay,
5 minutes, 2 minutes ago.
yeah. So the
Okay, so
permit streamlining.
there was. So for permit streamlining, several of the folks in the working group said that this would really give a lot more certainty if they could get their permits faster, and that would let them expand their businesses more rapidly, and it would give them more certainty for how soon it would allow them to do what they need to do so that they would know they'd get their permits quickly and they could get along with their business. This is something that staff is working on. It wouldn't hurt to put it in the policy, but we were looking at the direction from the committee a little bit more narrowly and didn't know whether this is something that should be in this policy or outside. We can do it either way. We just wanted your direction on whether it should be included or not.
I'm agnostic, Dr. Burke.
Let me tell you where I'm at on this. I'm not sure I agreed with the aging list because it wasn't enough detail for me and I didn't understand it. But here's where I am on the whole process. There needs to be more attention paid to getting these permits out. It's probably going to take more money. And I understand that the reduction of the workforce in the economic downturn was part of this problem. I understand that. But now it's time to turn it around.
Yep.
And I would like, I think we'd like to see a real legitimate analysis of what the backlog is, because if there's companies that are no longer in business or no longer pursuing their permits, they shouldn't be included in a backlog. And I got to believe if a guy's been in here waiting 5 years for a permit, I can't understand how he's still in business unless it's one of those who has a temporary permit and can operate. So if it is, we need to know that. But I for one would like to see a plan post haste on how much money and how we go about flushing out this backlog of permits so it's down to a minimal number. And we did it before, so I know we can do it again.
Dr. Burke, if I might add, we are working on that very issue. We're putting together that detailed log that has much greater detail and a rationale to address the very issues. The question in my mind is, as part of this committee, is it appropriate to include it or keep it separate on a separate track through the Permit Streamlining Committee, which just met last week, and sort of keep that focus?
It is separate. I mean, it's
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's a
significant,
separate
but it is
issue.
a separate issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's separate.
Who sits
and-
on the Permit Streamlining Committee?
It does not have a board.
I appointed.
We don't
so I
have a
should-
board member, sir.
Huh?
There is no board member. So it's open for your selection.
Well, there's a reason there's no board member, because I remember I had appointed a board member. So they either must no longer be on the board or some other reason. So
We'll
you
find
can
out.
let me know about that.
Yes.
Yeah, go.
Mr. Chairman, I think you are in the committee, right here.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I think you are in the committee along with Board Member Joe Liu.
With who?
Joe Liu.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But
I
this one
misspoke.
was the subcommittee meeting that took place
Last week.
last week.
Okay.
There are no board members there. It's just staff and the usual suspects, the Bill Quinns, the
Bill Lamar.
the Small Business Association, and various representatives from industry. who
But
are
I think you
represented
need a
there.
board member there so they can give you the additional resources that you may or may not need to
We'll
do
talk to
that.
you about that.
So I'll chat with Wayne
Yeah.
and see who we can give you to help you out.
Thanks.
Okay.
An expedited permit.
Yes.
A little bit.
Did we have it expedited? Just one little light tap
Yes,
to turn
yeah.
it green.
Make it go green. Make it go green.
Sometimes they're finicky. If not, try the one next to you.
I'll try this one.
They're nice.
Yeah, it is.
Do we have an expedited permit process, procedure?
do.
People who need just a simple permit can come in and don't have to get in
Yeah.
line behind somebody
We
who's
have
building a power plant?
Yeah, we have that.
There is a formal expedited permit process. If you ask the permittees, is there an expedited permit process, they may disagree. That's part of the challenge, and that's part of what Lockheed is helping to do, is reevaluate all of that, and let's make this, if we're gonna have an expedited permit, that it's truly an expedited permit system.
Right.
I think that we concluded, however, the permit streamlining is separate from the other issues
Yes,
Thank
we're
you.
discussing here. But it's really important. I mean, I was kind of shocked when I saw
The
back-
number.
a backlog of some thousand permits. That's unacceptable. So I'm glad our staff is working on it.
Right.
Okay.
We're on
How
it.
close are we to the end?
We can be as close as you like. I think the other input we were looking for was new source review, if that's separate or part of this policy.
Well, I
We
think-
asked you to come back after we had the hearing on reclaim in December to address this issue, the new source review and the credits, the reclaim credits that are left when we have a shutdown.
Right.
I think I would leave that separate at this point, since it was part of that whole process. I mean, that would be my opinion. I don't know how the others feel, but I would leave it separate as part of that process, bring that back to us pursuant to the board direction at that time, and we could start there with that.
Okay, and then are you okay with not addressing regulatory takings specifically in the policy and just leaving that separate?
Let's continue that to the next meeting.
Okay, we'll continue that. So the only other thing we can do is ask, because we've got the draft policy, we got minimal input from the working group, we've got some direction today so we can do some additional things. Trying to envision what additional process going forward. So we can do some additional work on the policy, we can go back to the working group, but we could possibly take this to Stationary Source Committee. We've got a working group with about 15 or 20 members, but we haven't really opened it up for a wider process, so we were wondering to see if you had any suggestions on that.
My personal opinion. My
Okay.
personal opinion is the most important thing that came out of this meeting is trying to put together a pilot project
Okay.
and see what you can do with WISPA. That's it. Yeah.
Maybe.
And work it out through the chair of Stationary Source.
Okay, thank you. Then that's all we
Are you
needed.
the chair of
in-
Stationary Source?
No.
Who's the chair of Stationary Source?
Ben Benoit.
Well, Ben.
And then, so that's it from the staff level. I don't know if you
No.
wanted to
That's
see if
good.
there's any comments from.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that Supervisor Nelson had to leave, but
We also
the
have
county
public
won't-
comment on the agenda, if there's anybody
Okay.
that would like
Any
some brief
public comment?
comments.
yes,
Just for the recording, could you come up to the mic, please? Take a seat at the table. Press the button.
make it go green.
Agree.
Okay, Clark. There you go.
All right.
You got it.
Great.
Yay.
Thank you. I'm Maya Gross with Alston and Bird, and I'm here on behalf of Gerdau. And I just want to briefly say thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and we really appreciate everything that staff has done in soliciting our input and incorporating our input as well. Very appreciated. I just want to provide a little bit of context because a lot of the discussion was on the scope today. And before we leave that discussion completely, I wanted to provide a little bit more context on the emissions credits and why I think it's a little bit bigger than just, for example, the reclaim shutdown credit question that you mentioned, and how it does relate to the question of providing incentives for companies to make large investments in this jurisdiction. One of the reasons we think it's important to really take a hard look at the emissions reductions credits and what happens to them when companies shut down is that as companies are going to make large compliance investments here, they are looking at what's in it for me. And one of the incentives, even if it's not provided by the district, is perhaps more productivity. So they can make a production increasing investment to justify it either to a bank or within their own corporate funding department. So in other words, they can make a large investment to
understand.
comply and have greater productivity. But sometimes that results in higher emissions. And so one of the options to deal with those emissions is to purchase more credits. But if the credits are becoming increasingly more expensive because the universe of credits is shrinking, it's just more difficult to justify when they're going to make this
If
investment.
Supervisor Nelson had his way, credits would disappear.
I definitely heard what he was saying. But I guess the other side of what he was saying is that looking for incentives, because what you get when you have a company that makes a production increase as well as an efficiency increases, you get more widgets, but that are more emissions efficient, if you hear what I'm saying. So the economic vitality increases, but the emissions efficiency of what you're doing is also increasing. So whether you get there by credits or whether you get there by command and control, you're achieving greater emissions efficiency while maintaining economic stability in the
Yeah,
basin.
but what the bank will be looking for, or the financing department, is can I amortize this out over the period of which is the life of the equipment?
That's
Right. So
Yeah.
that's also what Supervisor Nelson is.
I agree. Yeah, the
is-
life of the equipment is very
It's-
important. But being able to
It's
make
just
the,
not been, it's not been a policy, it's always been there as an alternative, but it's just been not one that we have used.
which one? What has not been something you've
We
used?
haven't been able to give companies a specific life of the equipment
I see. Yes.
guarantee.
No, and I really appreciate that staff has been looking at that question. So I just wanted to provide a little bit more context on the ERCs. And on the regulatory takings, I just wanted to clarify a little bit that in our memo that sort of responded to the district's memo on takings, we didn't say there would be a taking and you had to do something. We said there could be takings. And I think it's impossible to make a blanket statement about regulatory takings because it's very fact specific. So really what we were asking for was just to recognize that it's a very fact intensive, particularized examination, which you probably do behind closed doors anyway, but to make this a more public process and include it in the process, the rulemaking, to give companies that additional certainty that you're looking at a set criteria that looks at the takings rather than just kind of doing it on the side. So those were the only things that I wanted to say about the scope, and since we're not really talking too much about the other elements, we'll save that for another meeting. But
Thank you
very much for your time, and I really appreciate it again.
Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance. Okay. I just wanted to take a minute. First of all, I was on the working group and really appreciate all the effort the staff put into it. And I think we're moving toward a good outcome here. I just want to take a minute to talk about this whole idea that companies were given all these credits for free by the district. In fact, before Reclaim, all of these companies had permits that allowed them to emit air contaminants at a certain level. And in many cases, those permits did not have emission caps, or if they did have caps, they were way above what the facilities were actually emitting at the time. So there was a clear quid pro quo here. The facilities gave up their uncapped permits or caps that were much higher than their actual emissions in return for accepting a cap, understanding that there would be declining emission requirements imposed on them over the years, and a much, much more rigorous monitoring and record-keeping regime than any other facilities in the district or in the state pretty much had to comply with. So I think that you need to recognize that there were things that were given up by the facilities going into Reclaim. There were advantages that were given up in return for advantages they were getting in terms of allowing them to decide which pieces of equipment they wanted to control and how much they wanted to control, and as long as they stayed below their caps.
But they signed a document that said that there was no title property to those credits.
Right. No, I mean.
So they don't own those credits. They keep those credits by the executive director allowing them to transfer.
Well, I think they keep the credits because the rule allows them to use those credits, keep them or sell them. And it's true, yes, you can amend the rule and revise the conditions under which the credits are handled either by the district or by the facilities, but that would take a rulemaking process to do that.
I don't think so. But, I don't know. I'd have to ask the lawyer.
Okay.
It's my understanding currently that if the executive director does not sign the transfer, there's no sale. I'm talking to Kurt. He can hear me. He don't want to hear me, but he can hear me. But, and I'm not saying I'm advocating that.
No, I think what I would argue is that under the rules as they are now, the executive officer has a ministerial duty to, it's not a discretionary function. It's, I don't like this sale, but I do like this sale. It's, if the sale complies with the rules as they're in effect, then I have to sign the certificate. But, we could let a court decide that if we ever had to.
That's what courts decide.
Exactly.
That's what courts decide. Do we have any other testimony?
I have a question. How soon will it be before we have this process itself before the board?
Well, we'll have to see how soon we can get this pilot going.
No, I'm talking about what Dr. Burke was just talking about on the reclaim credits.
Oh.
The new
I can
amended.
speak to that. We've had several working group meetings over the last couple months. We're working on some a proposed rule language. We hope to release that by next week. At least one more working group meeting or workshop, and we're targeting a board hearing in October right now for that.
So you are meeting with the public and
Yeah.
and everyone is happy?
That's on the specific issue of the shutdown credits. There's a lot broader discussion that's went on today and even this morning about the future of the reclaim program, which we are starting to talk about in that same working group as well.
Go ahead.
Oh, my turn, all right. Hi, I'm Bill Lamar. I'm the Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance. I guess to begin with, I'd like to take exception to Jill's characterization of input or the lack of input to staff. The committee meetings or the working group meetings that we did have, I think were rife with valuable comments from us. Obviously, they didn't get translated into this presentation, which we just saw here just before the meeting started. And there's I think, in my opinion, that there's a big difference between staff's presentation and then the draft policy that we received a little while ago. But having said that, there was some comment about permit streamlining not being a part of this, the charter of this working group. There was some talk about permit streamlining not being a part of this working group or this committee. When we were asked to do a survey, as you can see on the fifth slide, permit efficiency came out on top. Well, in my definition, permit efficiency is a part of streamlining, is a part of permit efficiency. So I don't know how you separate that out. And recognition that the backlog is just intolerable, I think that gives more added weight to it. Not to diminish Lockheed's newly formed working group or task force. There's some other areas in here that are of concern. Supervisor Nelson mentioned earlier on about fear, why there hasn't been more input. It may not be, the fear may not extend to a half a dozen major refineries that are in this basin, but it certainly does to the 60,000 or so small businesses that operate in here and have permits with this agency. Under the previous administration, small businesses and small business concerns were tolerated more than they were acted upon. That was the basis where we approached Dr. Burke some years ago with the concept of the Small Business Alliance. Right. And shortly thereafter, small businesses was seated on all of the working groups and key committees, and we're very grateful for that. And thanks to Norma Glover, she appointed me as her appointee on several. I was part of her kitchen cabinet. Yes, I'm proud to say that. But anyway, having said that, I'd hate to see small business, the challenges that my members experience be sort of kicked to the curb on this in deference to major utilities, major oil companies, major aerospace, the big guys, because large investments to us, while they may be in the 100, 200, $500,000 range and not in the several $100 million or $1 billion range, they're still very significant, and they require precious capital or access to capital. And that's something that's an issue here that we raised, or I raised in this survey, and I see it didn't get up to where I had hoped it would, up on this ladder of priorities. There are a number of points in here. Useful life. I would like to see useful life. I think some care needs to be exercised in defining useful life. Useful life in a spray booth, for instance, is, while two different businesses are talking about spray booths. One might be a crematorium, the other might be an auto body shop. Same technology, different applications. Low NOx burners, another one, went through 1147 for 5 years, where you had thousands, 5,000 or 6,000 different applications of low NOx burners. Same technology, different applications. Glass glazers versus sausage makers or sausage curers. So who's to say that a spray booth's useful life is 7 years or 10 years? And to some of my members, a spray booth may be good for 20 or 30 years, properly maintained. And so that's something that needs to be, I think, addressed very carefully. And the other is cost effectiveness. We're going through the 8QMP now, and of course the REMI model rears its ugly head. The REMI model does not recognize small business impacts of regulation on small businesses. It may on the larger area, the geographic area, and on larger businesses, but not on ours. I think that we would all be served if staff were to access or partner with trade associations, business organizations, even equipment manufacturers, General Motors, Siemens, General Electric, all of them, to get input, industry input, equipment input from them to augment their socioeconomic analysis and make it more meaningful, certainly to smaller facilities. So,
Bill, I don't mean to cut you across, but I think we got 2 or 3 other speakers, and
and I'm finished.
Yeah.
May I
Okay.
just say 2 things? One, I want to apologize if in my haste to get through this quickly, that I in any way undersold the valuable input from the working group members. We only got 1 written comment, but the 3 working group meetings and all of the correspondences before that were really helpful to staff. So I wanted to say that. And then also, we sent all this material for the committee, and plus we sent the working group members a red line version to show you all the changes a week in advance. So if you didn't get that, come see me or Christina afterwards, Bill, because we sent that out last Friday about 5:30.
I received the
So you
draft-
should have-
the draft policy, but that's all.
Okay, you should have gotten everything, so something didn't happen there, but, so I did want to apologize though, because the working group has been really great.
So I want to cover one thing. I wonder if it would be useful, along with the pilot project for the big refineries, if we also had a smaller pilot project for one of the small businesses to kind of get a feel for what it would be like to apply this policy to a small business. And Bill, you could work with our staff to decide what small business would be the appropriate one to do a pilot project. I don't know whether that's going to be too much for our staff to work on, but it just seems to me like you've got 2 different, got apples and oranges here, and we need to kind of get our arms around what exactly we're doing with a policy that affects everybody.
I don't know that that'd be impossible. It'd be a challenge because of the dissimilarity between small businesses, but certainly I'd be happy to talk with.
But that's why I say just choose one,
Yeah.
where there's some consistency within that small business, where we could apply some of these,
Sure. Yeah, I'd
these
be happy to.
policy directives. Thank you.
I'm on a short stick. My time is running.
So's mine.
So, no, you'll be there long after I'm in the ground. You'll be there. So, but I
have your word on
the
that.
time that I have left in my term, which is about 15 or 16 meetings. I don't think, that from my perspective, that small business has anything to worry about. I will continue to advocate for them as I have in the past. Because that is the genesis of my background. I mean, I was a small business. I thought it was big. Marie Patrick is around here somewhere. She was my partner for 23 years. She thought it was big, but it was actually a small business.
And Norma was a printer.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, next person.
I was sitting there watching you.
I know. Susan Stark with Tesoro, and I just figured with all the comments about refineries and reclaim, I had to say at least something. And as we're talking about certainty, one comment I'll make about this past shave, adopted in December, we were told, don't worry about, future shaves, this is going to take care of things. And 4 months later, we were told there's another reclaim shave. So, I mean, that's the kind of
Who told you
certainty.
that?
Well, it was in the draft AQMP and the control measures. So that's just an aside. But I do want to say that as a result of the very exhaustive study done on reclaim for that shave, there was the look at how did people comply with the last shave and where are emissions and where were controls put in versus where they were expected. And one of the things that refiners did was over control in one area, the gasoline turbine or gas turbines. Those emissions were much less than were projected, but they didn't install necessarily 60 SCRs on boilers and heaters. But it was about the same amount, the over control in the turbines versus not
Yeah, I
doing
got
it and saving money. So having that kind of flexibility, that's what reclaim was about. But, and the other thing I would say about like purchasing the RTCs, it's a matter of public record, who bought what, not necessarily every refinery bought, scads of RTCs. Just wanted to say that too. And lastly, I will let WISPA know to be ready for a phone call.
But one of them did buy $60 million worth, right?
One of them did.
Yes, okay.
Anyone else?
Any other testimony? I'm on the highway.
Okay,
Been
thank you
nice.
very
Have a
much,
nice Friday. I'll race you home, Clark.
Oh, you'll race me home, okay.
Yeah.
See who gets on, but you got an advantage, though. You can go into the carpool lane.
Hey, man, let me tell you, and I'm all charged up. Am I?
All righty, bye-bye.
I didn't get charged up. All those spaces were taken this morning. So I'm going back on gasoline.
Going back on gasoline.
I am. Yeah.
All right, Judy. We'll see you. Nice to see you, sweetheart.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
No, I told
Oh, that's right. We don't have any committee meetings.
Your dad was in it? Oh, yeah, this guy fell off a cruiser.
Yeah, there are a number of.
I know.
It's not like the gas company.
Okay, so it's going to be called but I will let Sue and Patty know. Right. I know, there's a whole bunch of different
Slightly newer year. I know. We talked about that at the Lux.
I got the impression. Well,
ad hoc. Yeah, just because they have to. Yeah.
Hard to predict. Yeah, this we've had all the earmarks. Very coordinating and
Yeah.
off it goes. No, that's fine. I've heard your name. We'll give you certainty that we've got a quiz.
Oh, that's what.
And I'll say another reason. It's close to you. We're putting in new backhouse systems, so it's $22.5 million, and into that expedited process. We're expecting.